accomplishments are many. He has been speaking on campus to several groups. He started last night with a group of students, about 50 student leaders, and has done a couple of sessions for us already today. And has this one and one more before he flew back on the plane to fly back up to Corvallis, where they closed school today because of the snow. So
as I'm working on it, not
yeah. Go home, Larry. So, very briefly, I'll give you the highlights of Larry's bio. He currently serves as the Vice Provost for Student Affairs at Oregon State University, where he has been since 1995. He's also Professor of Ethnic Studies, and he is retiring from his Vice Provost position in June to go back to the faculty full-time, teaching both in Ethnic Studies and in Higher Education Leadership, I believe. His undergraduate degree is from Heidelberg College in Ohio, master's degree from Bowling Green State, and PhD from the University of Maryland. He's been heavily involved in professional associations and student affairs, including elected and appointed leadership positions in NASPA and the American College Personnel Association. He has also just completed terms as a member of the board of directors of NASOLGIC, the National Association of State Universities and Land-Grant Colleges, and as a commissioner with the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities. Larry also demonstrates community service through participation in a wide range of activities in Corvallis and in the other communities in which he has lived. And he is the recipient of more awards than can be listed right now. A couple of them that I will mention are it's called the Beaver Champion Award for Exemplary Leadership at Oregon State University, and he's received the Distinguished Alumni Award and the Chancellor's Minority Achievement Award from the University of Maryland. He has more than 20 publications, book chapters, journal articles, magazine articles, book reviews, monographs, and most recently, I believe, the one that I read that prompted me to call him and say, I'd really like you to come down to Humboldt and talk with us for a while, is one that was published in the Journal of College and Character entitled Who Owns Community? So I'm not going to say anything more about Larry. I think his words will speak for themselves. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Peg. It really is a gift to be here. So start with a couple of disclaimers. First one's probably obvious. I do all my own typing, which is not always a good. So I'm sitting here reading. It's like, who own community? It's like, okay, I feel like I'm back in Ohio again. My son, whenever I go to Ohio, he says, Dad, you're speaking Ohio. Which is like, I sort of lose S's and I lose punctuation and my inflection and everything. So apologize for any typos that show up here. Just trust that the sincerity of being accurate was there. I did. And the other is just how I came to this conversation, this issue around community and who owns community. And quite frankly, the difficulty of navigating a question of that level. And I write a regular column for the Journal of College and Character, and part of it is around sort of what are the issues on campus. And much I've been writing lately is about sort of how we recapture the humanity of the academy, and how do we help students to navigate worlds that are unknown to them. And the most recent piece that will be is about how do we respect and honor the affective dimensions of students' learning and the internal landscape of their lives, and how the subjects that we teach might land on them and their experiences. And so a lot of us sort of just constantly thinking about the wholeness of the academy and the people who are in it, and the leadership responsibilities that are inherent in us in being involved in such a spirit and soul-rich environment where people's souls and spirits are affected by who we are and how we show up and what we do in their lives. And so that's where much of this question around sort of who owns community comes from. There's, when you ask a question like that, there's always sort of this, okay, so what's the answer? So if I did that, we would be done. I could just tell you and then we could all leave. And it reminds me of when I was working at the previous school. I was at a small Catholic school in Rochester called St. John Fisher College, and I had a student who used to call me Doc. And she was always coming to my office, always in a hurry and always wanting something beyond the candy that I had on my office. But she came in one day, she said, Doc, I've got a question, but and I'm in a hurry, so this time I need a short answer. Well, you all aren't so fortunate. You're going to get the long answer today about who owns community. And so what I want to do is to try to weave my way through a conversation, which I hope can be a conversation about community and the dimensions of community, and just my thinking about what that means for us, and really sort of the conversation as a colleague, as someone who's involved in the enterprise, just as you all are, and in trying to make sense of it, and thinking about sort of the requirements of leadership for a community. For something so profound as community. And embedded in this is going to be a quiz. Not that you have to answer out loud, but it's going to be hopefully an assessment of the qualities that are needed to lead community, and for each of us to sort of examine ourselves and say, if this is what it requires to own community and to lead community, how well positioned am I to take up that mantle and to achieve that task. So that's what I hope to do. As I reminded the group this morning, though, I was raised Baptist, and so sometimes you get a live mic and a Baptist orientation, who knows where I'll go. So I'll do my best to stay disciplined in character. So I want to start with a little bit about just sort of talk about what I think are some of the dimensions of community and what community means. And so you think about sort of there's many definitions and many ways that people describe community, but think about community as the context in which people feel nurtured, sustained, and stimulated, where we take ownership and responsibility for the condition of our shared space. And I would add in that where we take responsibility for our shared humanity. And it's a place where we sort of have this interdependent system that's formed by the conversations that we hold with ourselves. Oftentimes we can measure, as I share with other groups, to measure the condition of our relationships by the condition of our conversations with each other. And so some of the foundations of community is what are those conversations that we hold with ourselves? And what does that reveal about who we are and what our commitment to the wholeness of each other is, or what our commitments are to the journey that we're on with each other. But community is also this paradoxical dance where we have this blend. When you come to a university campus, you have this blend of personal aspiration and personal sacrifice that we ask for of people in order to create and fit in this space. And where those two dynamics embrace. And where we say, I don't have to give up my aspirations to be world class at what I do, but also figure out how do I create space for others to achieve and to be their best self, or to achieve their highest ideals and highest aspirations. So there's this sort of paradox that we want individual strivers and commitment, but we also want this shared destination, and how do we get those two dynamics to embrace in our leadership as we try to navigate ourselves toward being who we want to be in the world. And it's also, and this is, I found this particularly fitting, thinking about community with the passing of Nelson Mandela, and thinking about just the incredible work that he did to unify that country, where love and forgiveness are central themes in what we do. One of the things I tell people is that, I absolutely love my job. I love my university. But my job has not been without heartbreak. There are times when the decisions that we make or the place we ended up on certain issues break my heart and land on my spirit in a way that makes me feel less than proud of where we are. But my love for the institution is a thing that ends in the end, holds today, and that this is where we are, and this just shows the work that we need to continue to do in our journey. And so this idea of sort of love and forgiveness about where we end up and how we show up around certain issues are really important themes in community. And so the way I got to this this question and felt the need to write about it was, I've had this series of conversations literally over the last year and a half with colleagues from across our university coming to me with stories of heartbreak, stories of isolation, stories of disillusionment about the sincerity of our stated mission and vision and values, and whether or not we were living with integrity, in integrity about who we are, and just looking for someone to hear their story. And I think in some ways thinking maybe that I had some answers, which oftentimes I think maybe I disappointed folks because I had more questions and more things of, well, have you thought about or did maybe consider, and gave them away, sent them away with more work to do, and usually work in relationship with the people with whom they experienced the disappointment. And so thinking about how to do that. And these were people from across all aspects of the university. So, I've done some work with our maintenance and facilities people, and they talk about some of the frustrations and experiences they have. Students coming to me. I served for a year and a half as the dean of our College of Liberal Arts on an interim basis. And many of the faculty from there who share with me some of the heartbreak and some of the experiences that they were having and some of the frustration. People in the tenure and promotion, different stages of the tenure and promotion process, and the concern they had about to what degree do people care about me and do I matter? So all with those same kinds of issues and questions. And so what I did was I sent a letter. I just crafted an email and sent it out to our entire campus. We have what we call informed lists. And I just sent it to every person on campus who had the email, basically recounting the series of conversations that I'd had. And that people had raised what I believe to be important questions about where are we as an institution in our journey toward being the community that we say we want to be. And asking anybody who was interested to join me in conversation about how we might respond to it. And I was absolutely astounded at the level of response that I received from people. And I did this without telling the president or the provost or anybody. I just said, it's just like, this is an issue that's come to me, and I feel like I need to own it, I need to express it, and I need to convene a conversation. And so immediately I started getting this flood of email responses, and it was more than just people saying, I would love to be in the conversations. They were narratives and testimonials about the kinds of things that people were experiencing that said to them that they were experiencing something that was less than community for them. But all had it embedded in them, this deep commitment but this is the kind of place that I want to be, that I believe that this is a place that can do it. So there was this sort of this hopefulness with it, that it wasn't just about complaining or whining. And so what I did was I tried to offer people some of the themes that had come up in the conversations that I had, and what I thought would be important. What would be the assumptions that I was bringing into the conversation? So I just want to share a few of those with you. So one of the things I shared is that I think community is always an urgent and compelling need. That whether we articulate it or not, any group of people living, functioning, being in close proximity to each other have a need to be in relationship with each other. And for some, that need is more compelling than others, is more profound than others. So we know that our cultures, our institutions have a cultural heritage. There's a cultural design to them. In fact, I describe a culture as that thing which provides us with a design for living. Well, the cultural designs of campuses create sort of a ready welcomeness and space for belonging for some more so than others. And so there are some who feel like outsiders that have an even more compelling need because they need to hear from the institution even more. I need to know even more that you need me and that you want me and that you care about me. Whereas the messages of care for some are much more apparent in the structure and who gets honored in leadership and those kinds of things. So there's always this compelling need for community, and there's always, in some ways, an urgency to that need, whether it's articulated or not. People are seeking connection. And And there is connection, they're seeking engagement, and they're seeking nourishment. And there is this human yearning to be embraced in relationship, to be in connection, and to be in alignment with others, to be in kinship with others. And this is something that I think we oftentimes is difficult to articulate, and that makes it difficult to figure out what is our leadership disposition around it. What do leaders do with human yearning that shows up in the face of them, particularly when it's on such a mass and large scale? And I'm sure this should excite people about, oh, I'll own it. Yeah. Community is as described, the community is fluid, is multidimensional, but it's also manifested in all of our interactions and behaviors. That the things that we do as we meet people, as we greet people, demonstrate the desire we have to be in community with each other. What openness do people receive from you? How do we behave, and does that demonstrate our desire for closeness? Or do we desire in a way that we sort of be on this plane of distance and superficiality with each other? And so community is this very fluid, very multidimensional, almost difficult to wrap your head around and your hands around and your arms around as a leader dynamic. Feelings of community are demonstrated in how groups perform, how individuals act toward each other, and how they act toward our policies and our physical environment. So we can see the remnants of being more in community with each other and less with community with each other all the time. One of the things I was astounded at when I assumed the role in the College of Liberal Arts was that we had people who refused to attend department meetings and would say things like, I'm not going to be in the same room with this person. And coming from student affairs, it's like, well, that's not an option. It's like I wasn't aware that dynamic happened. But again, it's sort of this idea that we can see those kinds of things when we say, do people exercise the option of being in relationship with each other? And those places where you have choice, do you exercise that choice in favor of being in relationship, or do you exercise that in favor of isolation and aloofness from each other? And so part of the challenge that we have as leaders is how do we create this kind of environment where, not where you compel, because I don't believe in community as a mandatory activity, but how you create a space where people, when presented with the option, opt in the direction of being in association with in free association with each other, as opposed to in isolation or disconnection from each other. And so we see how people feel about the community get demonstrated by them voting with their feet and voting with their behavior. So we see physical traces around the community when people don't respect the physical environment. And that comes through litter, it comes through defacement of property, it comes through those kinds of things. And you know when people have a deeper appreciation for community when you see that when those things aren't present. And so again, we're responsible for cultivating all of those aspects of community. The desire for community is a university-wide need that requires leadership. And when I convened the group, I said, I see this as a community-wide need, and it's become very apparent that it's a community-wide need, and it requires leadership. I'm just not sure that I'm that person. I'm not sure that necessarily that I'm the one who owns it. But because I'm naming it in this moment, I am prepared to own it for the sake of this conversation, to figure out where we go and what we need to do to adjust it. But it requires leadership because community does not happen by chance. Community is an intentional destination. It's an intentional process, and which means it then requires intentional leadership and thoughtful leadership. And then going even beyond the academy, you know, the current condition of our society offers clear evidence of the need for a community. There have been lots of polls and surveys to talk about some of this broad-scale disillusionment about the condition of social relations, the faith that people have in the direction of our country, particularly from a relationship perspective, relationship among parties, and who cares about the state of the country, and is there alignment around that? And so community is not just this local issue. It's a broad national and I would dare say international issue as you look beyond, even beyond our borders. So I want to talk a little bit more about the sort of the current condition and what I believe some of the things that demonstrate the need for community are. So when I look at it, I think that in many ways our social institutions are ailing. They are challenged in so many ways. And it's not just the challenges that we face in higher education, but you could look in the religious sector and say, what is the church, the condition of the church, what is the condition of what's happening in corporate America, what's happening in so many sectors of our society, where we look at our institutions need some other foundational values, they need some other foundational elements to lift them up, to cause them to function in ways that are different and that seem to be more other-centered than they currently are. In so many ways, the lives of people have become disconnected, and you can, think back to all the issues related to whether or not people are joining civic organizations at the same rate, and whether or not people are, even the bowling alone, whether people are bowling, or they're joining other groups and doing things together, or people choosing isolation. But too many people have become disconnected. There are lots of people who feel at risk, and feel at risk in so many ways. And I think the economy obviously played a large role in people feeling economically and financially and professionally at risk. Is my job going to be there? And that influences the degree to which people invest in a space. If they feel that they're marginal and they're at risk in that space, we won't get from them their full selves. And we won't get that same full and deep engagement. People's personal value gets questioned. General question like, do my needs matter? And as we think about the broad national leadership, sort of who cares about me? Who's thinking about me as they argue with each other? And those sorts of issues. And again, it could be on a large national scale. It could be on a local level that those kinds of questions get asked. And so as a result, I think hope, and for many people, hope has gotten shaken around, can I believe in the ideals that we put out? And on our campus, we had new faculty who were coming in and saying, I was attracted to these ideals, but these ideals haven't surfaced in the institution, my relationship with the institution at this point. How do I restore my hope in the institution that I thought I was joining and get back to that place? And then finally, the need for community really comes about because, in my view, everybody is significant, and this point has to be reinforced in our leadership and our relationship. So when I think about what community, because we've got to, in some ways, create a compelling reason for why we want to move toward community. So what can community do for us? I think community is a healing agent. People come to the university, they come to their experiences here from backgrounds that have been marked by a wide range of treatment in life situations and conditions. People can come from situations of isolation. They can come from experiences of neglect. So I think about my own personal experience growing up under conditions of poverty, growing up in an inner city environment, and then going to a university, going to a college, and finding a place where I felt like I mattered, where my dreams were taken seriously. I arrived at college very angry, very distrustful, very disillusioned by the American dream, and left there fully invested in the possibilities that the world presents for all of us. And so I think when we think about what community can do for us, it can restore and it can heal people in ways that empower them to live in the world in a way that they never could had they not gotten exposure to our experiences and the things that we have to offer. Creates a sense of belonging. It helps us to acknowledge for ourselves the interdependence that we have, that we are not solo, isolated vessels, but we are in that shared destiny with each other. It can help us to elevate our accountability and help us to know that we are responsible beyond ourselves, that we are not just accountable for whether we do our job, but we're accountable for whether Oregon State University or Humboldt State University rises up to the level of demonstrating that it is who it says it is to the lives of its members. And so it can help us to all feel some sense of accountability for whether or not we are communities or not. It helps us to demonstrate our value for each person. We say this in sort of this throwaway kind of thing sometimes, that everybody matters. But then the issue is we've got to translate that, and it allows us to have a way that we actually demonstrate that. Community also can be a guidepost. Right? It offers us guidance for what kind of relationships we want to be in with each other and the path to getting to that level of relationship with each other. It serves as a reinforcement that we are the type of institution that we say we are. That those, again, it's not that our missions and our institutional visions are not throwaways. They're not something just there for marketing, but they're real and they're deep and they're profound. And then community can deepen our love of place and each other. And oftentimes in organizations, we have trouble with the L word. Right? I don't know if any of you have read stuff by Meg Wheatley, but she has a wonderful essay that talks about fear and love in organizations, and that how easy it is for us to have conversations about the things that we fear or what are concerned. But it's very difficult for us to have conversations about love, because we can somehow make it something very perverse. But love is about sort of, how do you have people leave this experience saying, I was so touched by the place that I leave there with a never-ending affection for my university. And that however my university shows up with all of its shining moments and its flaws, the love I feel for that will not be diminished because of the depth of relationship that I've had and the depth of connection that has been cultivated for me with that institution. Well, that's what true community can do for us. It can help us to get to that place of having that deep sense of love and affection. So, not that the answer is going to come right now, but who should or will step forward to claim ownership for the condition of the space we share? Which is another way of saying, so who's going to take responsibility for community? Well, I think there are certain roles that go with that. And anybody who says they want to take responsibility for being a community builder maybe need to think about sort of what are the roles and am I willing to assume those roles. So the first one is to create an agenda for common caring and grace. And what would that mean? That we have an agenda for how we will care for each other and how we will cultivate a level of interaction and a form of interaction that allows us to show grace in our relationship with each other. And I'll talk about grace a little bit longer, because to me that's I believe that's a very important quality in leadership. Someone who's willing to take responsibility to make meaning of relationships. Which means, how do we go from this broad associations of departments and units and divisions to actually aligning ourselves as a community of learners, community of scholars, community of leaders. and someone helped to make meaning of those relationships in a way that adds power and substance to the way that we work together. Someone who's willing to foster connections, to bring people together, to knit our relationships together in a way that shows that we are inextricably linked with each other. Someone who can support the voice, the visibility, and the sense of mattering of others. And the sense of mattering is a very powerful thing, because one of the things that we know that gives people form is the sense that they matter. And oftentimes what happens in environments is that we find that some people matter more than others. So some people who don't feel that they matter enough, and some people matter too much. And so how do we give people a sense that they matter, and that their voice and their contributions are valued and cherished? And then someone who's willing to help the community members to discover individual and shared possibilities for each other, which means sort of this ongoing journey, this ongoing dialogue about who can we be with each other, and who can we help you to be that will be pleasing to your soul and honoring of your ambitions and potential. As I ran across a quote that really struck me, and it really describes sort of the times we're in right now. Is sort of, as we move through these unprecedented times, it's vital that we connect with the people, conversations, and events that align with our values, promote healing and growth, optimize the potential of our interconnectivity, and support us to be generative in the face of whatever comes. And there are some themes within here that I'll try to touch on later as we go through the assessment of what will it require of us to actually lead community. So, in order to determine who owns community, this is where the assessment begins. And what I want to do is just sort of offer a series of thoughts around what I believe to be some of the requirements, some of the disposition that's needed for us as we make a decision about whether we want to assume ownership for community. And the first one is a question. The first one is, what possibilities do you hold? And is there a positive future associated with those possibilities? Sometimes the way I think about it is sort of like, what are the possibilities that people see you hold up? And in their mind, is there a future associated with those possibilities? And is it a future that is worthy of your community's energy? Another way to think about it is because sometimes the possibilities that we hold up for people surface in the conversations that we have is, what is the set of conversations that you're known for, that are most associated with you? And is that who you want to be known as? And so if you think about people whose the set of conversations that people associate with them are about being hopeful and about having a vision, a powerful vision for who the university can be or who we can be collectively, versus the conversations around who people aren't and what's lacking and where people's flaws are and where their feelings are. Community leadership, ownership for community, requires the ability to construct conversations that have future associated with it, and that are about elevating the possibilities of who the institution can be when it achieves its best, and who it is when it shows up as its best. Ownership for community requires the ability to demonstrate generosity. And this is just, generosity isn't about giving things to people. It's about being generous with the space that you create for others. So generous people listen in a way that people who aren't generous don't. So when relationships aren't going well, when we're in a place of being uncommunity-like, and we're in relationship with people, oftentimes what we will do is we listen for negative intent. Right? So you have someone who you aren't in good relationship with, and they'll say good morning to you. This is the way I look at it. Somebody would say, you know, good morning, Larry. And what I hear is, you are a very unfortunate looking individual. Right? Because I don't want to hear good morning. I don't want to go for the most positive intent in what they're saying, and I don't want to go with, wow, that person really hopes that I'm having a good morning. Right? Leadership for community means that we extend to people incredible generosity, and that we're prepared to listen to them and hear them from a place of what is the positive potential in their intentions and in where they are right now. Even if it's coming with us with a complaint. Now, somebody asked me this morning, so, you know, what do you do when somebody comes to you and they're complaining, right? And they're complaining about something, everything. Or they're putting you down, or they're attacking you. Well, as a community builder, my mindset has to be, when people are upset, they communicate in the best way that they know how. And I need to be able to consider it a gift that they share it with me, however it comes out. And then you start from there, because if they're complaining, that means that they think things can be better. And that they're hoping that things can be better. So that's a complaint is a hopeful thing for a community builder. But we've got to approach it from a place of generosity in order to hear that as, wow, this was a hopeful invitation to get this person to feeling about the institution in a way that's different than they feel about it right now, or feeling differently about their colleagues than they feel about their colleagues right now. And so how do we get there? So it requires someone who demonstrates generosity. It requires the ability to be accessible, to sit in the middle. And I shared this with the student affairs folks earlier this morning. This person asked about sort of a requirement for leadership. And one of the things I think is that in community, we always have these things that can polarize us against each other and can pull us in different directions. And the community builders have to sit in the middle. And community builders are not neutral. Community builders are value-centered, but the values is the mission of the institution. So when incidents have happened on our campus that have been what we call, without apology, despicable behavior, that have damaged the spirits of others, whether it's, we had some Islamophobic incidents, we've had racial incidents, we've had homophobic, so we've had all these kinds of incidents. And my job isn't to name who's wrong. My job is to say, how do we respond to this incident in a way that allows us to come out of it affirming that we are who we say we are. So it's not about naming and blaming and isolating. Because how do we both resolve those issues and bring the person into deeper relationship with us? I don't know if any of you recall the situation at UCLA a few years ago where there was a student who released this YouTube. They called it this Asian rant, where she was just going on and on about Asian students in the library and all the noise and this sort of thing. And for some reason, I got a call from the Los Angeles Times asking me sort of, whether incidents like that had happened at Oregon State and whether or not, and how I would respond to those incidents. And I said, well, I'm not sure you're going to be talking to me because I think my perspective may be different than some of the other people you've talked about. The reporter said, no, I would be interested in hearing your perspective. And I said, well, what I heard was a cry for help. I said, it was hurtful, it was despicable, I was concerned about it. But what I heard was a student saying, I find myself living in a world that I don't understand. And I need somebody to help me to figure out how to live in this world. Well, that's a call for community leadership. The outcome was that the student eventually got driven out of the university. which I think was unfortunate because we had the opportunity to wrap our arms around her. They had the opportunity to wrap their arms around her and bring her in a deeper community and to help her to get to a place where she did have the tools to live in the world that was creating such fear for her that she had to unleash it in such an unvarnished way. So that's the challenge. And so it requires us as leadership to figure out how do we not immediately go to where our hurt is and learn this way to sit in the middle and be accessible and say, my job is about helping us to get to a place of acting as who we say we are and coming out of this in better condition than we were before this incident occurred. I think the responsibility of community builders is to lead people, not to manage things. And I do say this because oftentimes we get caught in this dichotomy between, well, I'm a manager and I'm a leader, but I also have to build community, and how do you do that? Well, in my mind, I've just made a separation. I manage things and I lead people. And community is about leadership. So you can manage your time, you can manage your budgets, you can manage that, but people need leadership. And our human community needs leadership, which means us putting people in the best position to make good things happen for themselves and others. That's sort of my quick and easy definition of what leadership is. And that's what community is putting ourselves in the best position to make good things happen for us. And community builders have this responsibility to be creative, and particularly how to think about how do we transform eliminative conversations into conversations of possibilities. Again, issues get presented to us through a particular frame, and oftentimes those are eliminative frames. And we have to think about how we transform those into community building frames. So as an example, several years ago, and again, this happens all the time, so I always have to sort of, in my mind, think about how do I make sure I'm translating things in the right way so that I'm staying in my role as a community builder. Many years ago, and some of you recall just an incredibly tragic situation where Matthew Shepard was murdered in Wyoming. And many campuses, as did ours, sort of took up the issue and wanted to do rallies and do other things to try to bring people together to coalesce around shared values. And so I got a call from a group of students at my desk asking me if I would come to their, they were going to do a Stop the Hate rally, and asking me if I could come and represent administration. And I said, I chose my words very carefully. I said, sorry, I'm not available to represent administration that night, that particular evening. But I went to the rally because I was free. And they had an open mic night, and so I stood in line, and when my time came at the mic, I thanked the organizers and told them how appreciative I was for them putting the energy into it, and then expressed that I had been invited to come and speak on behalf of administration. And I told them that I wasn't available to represent administration. I said, but I wanted to be here because I am available to represent my own feelings as a member of our society and our community, and to represent how deeply as a person this hurts me. That when I experienced the pain of that, I didn't experience it as an administrator. I experienced that as a member of this community. And then I got to trying to think about how do you do a conversation to transform from the eliminative to creative. And I said, I can really appreciate those who have a deep commitment to eliminating hate. But I have this deep nagging feeling that people who are oppressed want more to live in a world, more than just to live in a world where hate isn't directed at them. I think people want to live in a world where they feel affirmed, and where they feel loved, and where they feel cherished. And so what would it mean if we were to commit to creating a more loving campus, a more loving and caring society? And again, that's the challenge between, do we lead toward, we want to do the eliminative work, or do we lead toward what is the state that we're trying to create with ourselves? So we can oftentimes find those things that get to our souls and our spirits and that drag us down, that we want those things to stop right now, but we don't fixate on what we want to replace it. Because there will be some dynamic that shows up in the place of those things that we eliminate. And so I think we need to think about what those are. As community builders, we have to think about how we manage others' reputation that we would manage our own. Community builders are about building positive reputation for the institution and for each other. And this is particularly important, that community builders are about affirming our appreciation for leadership. And I know people don't like to hear it, they hear it sometimes, but there is such a thing as leadership oppression. And we want to be closer to each other, yet we find that ways that we sort of oppress those people who are in leadership roles by making them less human than the rest of us. And community is about affirming the humanity of everybody and naming and owning where certain things happen, but not diminishing the humanity of people just because of particular roles that they have. And so how we manage the reputation of each other, particularly the reputation of those who have those high profile and often challenging leadership roles. It requires somebody who resides in hope and is able to communicate a hopeful image of the future. Again, that's sort of a unique quality, that I am somebody who, regardless, to say to yourself, I am somebody that regardless of the difficulty or the challenges that confront me or our organization, I will stay hopeful, and I will always maintain in my possession a hopeful image of the future that I can communicate and project to others. And it requires someone who can embody grace. And grace for me has three dimensions. Someone who can behave in a way that shows that they're graceful, gracious, and that they're grateful. We have to, some way, be really grateful for all the opportunities that we have to be in relationship with each other and to chart a future for our organization through its best times and through its most challenging times. And thinking about, it's easy to do during our best times, but it's really hard to feel grateful for what you're handed and what's in front of you when times get really hard. Community builders maintain this quality of being grateful all the time. And this graciousness that in the face of the disappointment, the face of the setbacks, that you can hold on to it. And so thinking about what does it mean to be graceful in the navigation of our culture and the navigation and the construction of our relationships, and gracious in the face of whatever comes at you. And then in the end, to communicate being grateful for the opportunities that we have to be in relationship and to lead community, regardless of what happens. There's a couple more things. It requires someone who's able to elevate the sacred in our work. And what is more sacred than the lives of the people with whom we have the opportunity to be in relationship with each other? To elevate that there is nothing more important than we do than the health, the wellness, the well-being of the members of our community. That the condition of their lives, the condition of their souls, the condition of their spirit, the condition of their dreams, that is the most important work that we do. Because that's what preserves the integrity of our community and the integrity of each individual life. So as community builders, we have to be able to elevate the sacred in our work. And then finally, to connect your heart, your head, your heart, your spirit in your work as a community builder. That community builder is not mechanistic work. I mean, it requires a certain knowledge that goes with building community in terms of understanding the process of community building and the stages of community development and all of those kinds of things. But it's about the head and the heart. And I had experience a few years ago that just sticks with me, and it was a really profound experience. As my wife, my son, and I, my son is now 17 years old, but at the time he was well, he must have been around 11, 12 years old. We were in San Francisco at a bowl game. And we were walking down along Fisherman's Wharf, going in and out of shops, being tourists and that sort of thing. And we were walking out of a gallery and we passed somebody. And my son, of all people, looked at it and says, I think that was Santana. And so it was like, it was Carlos Santana. We passed by. So we stood, we just sort of hung around outside there, you know. I tell people it wasn't, I know the legal definition of stalking, and it was not stalking. But so we sort of hung around out there and just waited. And he was with his wife, and so he came out, and I'm an introvert, so I'm not talking to anybody who's not talking to me. So I just sort of standing there, but my wife, who's like shameless, he just walks up to him and says, you know, Mr. Santana, you know, we're sorry to interrupt you. And I say, no, you're not. She says, sorry to interrupt you, but you know, our son plays the guitar, and he absolutely loves your music. And so Santana walks over to him and looks at him, and he says, my son was tiny at the time. Now he's taller than me, but he was like this. And Santana walks up, and he's dressed impeccably, like all white, you know, all white clothes, white hat. And he looks at my son, he says, so you play the guitar, huh? And he says, can I give you a gift? And my son said, yeah. So he gets down on one knee, and he tells my son, he says, give me your hands. And so he puts his hands together, and so he wraps his hands around my son's. And he says, I want you to close your eyes. He says, now, he says, I'm going to draw a line from here to here. He says, now I want you to move your head up and down. He says, can you feel it pulling on your heart? And my son said, yeah. He says, the world needs our music now more than ever. He says, but when you play your music, make sure you always keep your head connected to your heart. And that will allow it to be real. And that will allow you to deliver what the world really needs from us. And so for me, always being on the job, I immediately think, that's about student affairs work. You know? Right? So I'm on the job. And I'm thinking, you know, that's what it's all about, right? Is that the world needs our leadership. Our campuses need our leadership now more than ever. But if we're going to give our campuses what they need, it's got to be about us connecting what's here and what's here, and then producing it on behalf. So the answer to who own community is, if you name it, you own it. So any of you who look and say, you know, we need to be closer with each other, we need to be more appreciative of each other, then you own it. You own whatever that next step is to get you further on that journey. Because otherwise, it's about giving the condition, because community is about creating the world in which we want to live. Right? It's giving somebody else responsibility for the condition or the world in which you want to live. And each of us shares responsibility for creating the world in which we want to live. And hopefully that's a world in which others want to reside with us. So thank you all very much.